Hello and welcome to this episode of M360 Metabolic Fitness. We're going to go over some things that will dramatically change your health and your life. Changing the outcome by changing what you do and how you think. Okay, first thing we're going to talk about is 2 tests that we need you to take that we offer at M360 Metabolic Fitness as affiliates for PNOE, which is a gas exchange equipment system that does this measuring. What's called a CPET, cardiopulmonary exercise testing. The first test we do is what is your resting metabolic rate? What does everything hinge on? You know, there's 2 things we do really well as human beings. We do nothing, laying around, sedentary. I mean, look at the math on that. And then we get up and we don't just do some moderate exercise, we do too much. So we're really good at nothing and too much, 2 extremes. And that's basically what we test. Because we want to find out what are those inside and outside parameters, those left and right parameters. Okay, so through a resting metabolic rate test, which is a 20-minute test laying on your back with the gas exchange system on, it's just a mask and a device that measures, it's like breath analyzer, measures your oxygen in or extracted from the air you breathe and the CO2, carbon dioxide, ventilated upon exhalation. So it's a 20-minute test. We're also looking at heart rate data. So a lot of times I call things cardiometabolic testing because we're looking at this 20-minute average of laying there, whether it's the afternoon, morning, noon, or night, whatever. What is your heart rate? And there are people that lay there at 100 beats a minute. It's scary. And there's people who lay there at 45, 50 beats a minute. So what is the 20-minute average heart rate, average beats per minute, for you laying flat on your back when we do this test? It's going to measure gas exchange, oxygen and CO2 out during that period of time. So we're going to get your average heart rate. It's going to show how you react to stress and just how fit or unfit you are, how healthy or unhealthy you are, cardiometabolically speaking. Okay? And then we're going to look at, while you're laying there, you know, what's paying the bill in terms of energy to keep your lights on, your heart beating, your blood flowing, and everything else. What percentage of carbohydrate and fat are being utilized? But it's going to see that. It's going to see the breakdown. And then daily energy expenditure. You ever buy a candy bar or a piece of steak or something, you look at the nutritional information on back, carbohydrate, protein, fat, and then it says based on a 2,000 calorie diet. That's what your base metabolic rate is in terms of energy expenditure. They're assuming everybody's 2,000. Well, my wife's smaller and her energy expenditure is about 1,300. That's her base metabolic rate. Mine's around 1,900 to as high as 2,800. Depends on what you're doing. If you catch a person in the afternoon when you do the test, or in the morning. So you see that energy expenditure. We like to do these tests in the morning if you can, but you can also get them in the afternoon. It's just mine ranges from 1,900 at low to around 2,800. If you catch me in a more excited part of the day. Here's an actual example of that more excited part of the day. This would have been taken in the afternoon, and this is the actual PNOE printout of my resting metabolic rate, 20 minutes in duration. I'm just laying there, okay? So my average heart rate is 54 beats a minute, which is excellent. My average respiratory exchange rate, that's a ratio of CO2 to oxygen, is 0.73. Tells me I'm basically fat burning. And up here I see that. Of all the energy I needed, which was 1.9 calories of energy per minute, or 2,800 per day, this is my resting metabolic rate. In this case, again, I've seen 1,900 before. I use 2,400. But while I'm laying there, 83% of my energy demand was covered by fat, 17% by carbohydrates. So if you don't look at the total expenditure during the 20, there they are down there, fat and carbs. Okay, so I use 30 grams or 30 calories worth of fat to lay there for 20 minutes and 6 calories, 6.3 of carbohydrate. Okay, I only needed 7.9 milliliters per minute of oxygen per kilogram. So those are my vitals, man. That's the information that counts when I'm laying there. So that's to the left of the page. That's the nothing. Laying there, sedentary. So resting metabolic rate, let's just define it real quick. Think of the idle of your car as your RMR. Again, think of the idle of your car as your RMR. We just idle down as humans. We can't stop and turn the car off like a car does. In life, that'd be called death. So we just idle down. So it's that low idle is your resting metabolic rate. It is a variable rate that is altered by when you measure time of day, morning, noon, or night. It's usually lowest during the morning, during sleep, and gets a little higher as you proceed through your day. Resting metabolic rate is measured or quantified in caloric energy expenditure. So it's measured by calories. We call it EE, or energy expenditure, and we know that the energy we're referring to are kilocalories. My own example, the lowest I've seen my RMR lately has been around 1890 to 1900 calories. That was in the morning, fully rested. And obviously, as your body idles up to cover what you're doing or to recover from what you did yesterday, your RMR will be a little higher. So, and I've seen it as high as 2,800, and that's on that previous test. That's what happened to be at that test. So I typically use around 2,400 kilocalories as a base metabolic rate or a resting metabolic rate for any nutritional programs they're doing, where I'm looking at percentage of carbohydrate, protein, or fat as a percent of total energy expended. That's right on every label. So it assumes 2,000 calories, and it tells you what percentage of those calories are protein, carbohydrate, and fat, or what's referred to as your macronutrients. With our gas exchange test, okay, details the caloric expenditure during that 20 minutes. Okay, so we're looking at energy expenditure. We're looking at fat, how it breaks out in terms of what percentage fat, what percentage carbohydrate. And we do that with the tool of respiration called respiratory exchange rate. It's breathing. As you're breathing, it's measuring that O2 in, CO2 out. So we as humans pretty much live between a ratio of 0.7, which should be 0.7 or lower, which is 100% fat utilization, and 1.0, which is pure carbohydrate utilization. So we'll see that number in a second. So what is your respiratory exchange rate? Well, that's a loaded question. Depends on when you're taking it. The quick answer would be it's somewhere between 0.7 and 1.0. So what is your average respiratory exchange rate during an RMR, resting metabolic rate test? So when you're laying there for 20 minutes, what is your average RMR? What is your average RER during an RMR? It sounds confusing, but it's not. What is your percentage of fat versus carb utilization? People who count calories need to understand that there's a world of difference, metabolic reaction difference of 1 calorie of fat versus 1 calorie of carbohydrate to your body. So it's important to understand what you're using. Here we go. Go back to this Pinoy test. So what is your average RER during an RMR test? Here's an RMR test. My average RER was right here, 0.73. What is your percentage of fat? Well, the energy I needed for that 20 minutes of rest came from 83% fat and 17% carbohydrate. This tells me I am fat adapted. My body sought out and utilized fat to support this 20 minutes laying there, consuming 7.9 milliliters per minute of oxygen per kilogram. Okay, it's beautiful stuff when you get into it. What is your current VO2 max? VO2 max is your fitness. Keep that in mind. So here's a ramp test I did, which we're going to talk about next. Cardio metabolic crossover test, or a stress test, or a max VO2 test, depending on how you look at it and what you want to define it as and call it. In this particular test, I went from 50 watts up to my max wattage and peaked out, couldn't go any further. And what you're going to find here is I'm very proud of. I'm 62 years old. I got a 60, let's just call it 61 milliliter per minute per kilogram VO2 max. Here's the scale. This is for men and women, and you're going to be able to look at this and find out where you rate where you're at in your journey. 60 plus, superior is over 44 milliliters per minute per kilogram. I was at 61. My max heart rate on this particular test hit 146. I hit a wattage, I think, of 297. You're going to see that in a minute. My average RER during the test was 0.87. Remember, you start off real easy. You might be in the 0.7s, and you start going in the 0.8s, and you end up, well, this says 2. That was an outlier, but I got up over 1. So what were my substrate utilizations? I utilized 55% fat and 44% carb during this test. It's a stress test, so that makes perfect sense that I'd burn a little bit more carbohydrate. Okay, and based on that rate, I'm burning 13.6 kilocalories per minute. Means I'd be burning 19,000 calories a day. So it's a whopper. You understand where all this math comes from. Cardiometabolic crossover. All right, we've done the resting metabolic rate test, the RMR. That's measuring to the left. I hate to call it nothing, but let's call it sedentary. Laying on your back is pretty sedentary. Okay, you're resting. Metabolics. So now we're going to go to the right. We're going to go to the max. We're going to go to the stressors in life. Okay, and I call this metabolic crossover. So let's define this before we look at the colored pictures of it. CMC is the point at which carbohydrate takes over as 100% as the substrate for the creation of ATP. Adenosine triphosphate is made in our body, and it comes from 2 substrates. So this cardiometabolic crossover is that point at which you go to 100% carbohydrate as the substrate to create ATP, as the raw material. And fat as a substrate for ATP goes to 0. You're going to be able to see that in a second. The general goal of our program is to establish fat as your go-to substrate for as long as possible during your life or during a competition as an endurance athlete. Keep in mind my position on that. We're all endurance athletes. I don't care what you do or what you like to do or what you think you do. As a human being that lives 70, 80, 90, 100 years, you're an endurance athlete by default. The more power, speed, pace, performance that you can sustain prior to cardiometabolic crossover, the better. Why? Because pretty much once you hit CMC, you've hit lactate threshold and your days are numbered. So you're going to have to either slow down or stop. Lower stress, lower inflammation, lower oxidative stress. The further your CMC is to the right, the lower the stress your body will go through in between in life, in the moderate, 50, 60, 70, 80% of your max heart rate. It's going to be a lot cooler burn, less stress, less inflammation, less oxidative stress. In a nutshell, less chronic reaction. Chronic conditions come from chronic reactions to life, competition, the training, the stress load, blah, blah, blah. Balance. Get out of balance. Less chronic condition, less chronic disease. Keep in mind that last check, chronic disease took up a whopping $2.9 trillion of our total $3.2 trillion healthcare costs in the U.S. So chances are whatever's going to bring you down are these chronic conditions that you're living through that are part of your lifestyle right now that are tied to inflammation, oxidation, and a general lack of aerobic fitness. I could just say fitness, but it's really aerobic fitness. Let's define fitness. So we're using that word. It's not your guns. It's not your abs. It's not your hair color, all that bullshit. It's your ability to uptake and utilize oxygen, CO2, or ventilate CO2, uptake and utilize oxygen, O2. Sorry, I screwed that up. Utilize oxygen, O2, and to ventilate CO2. So every time you breathe in air. And from that air, your body has the capacity to extract oxygen, to utilize that oxygen to create energy, to convert fat and protein as a substrate or a raw material into a usable adenosine triphosphate or a unit of energy. Okay, the currency of energy in our body. And then ventilate that byproduct, ventilate the CO2, get rid of the the gas and create energy. So ATP is the energy currency of our body, and it's produced in the mitochondria, which reside in the cells of our body. So you have to know that from high school biology. Just know that energy in our body is ATP. It's not sugar, it's not carbohydrate. It's how your body breaks down and utilizes those two substrates. And there's two very distinct downlines from burning fat as a fuel for ATP rather than burning sugar through the Krebs cycle. And that all happens in a cellular place. Man, our energy is amazing. And the mitochondria they come from, we can triple the mitochondria if we do things right within the cell. We can clean out that cell and make for what is typically ugly is when we have cellular or mitochondrial, maladapted mitochondria within our cell. And that's just mitochondria that don't perform very well. We can affect that. That's really exciting to me. Talk about biohacking. It's very important to realize that we do two things very well, that nothing and too much. Or we're totally sedentary and then we become weekend warriors. We join a CrossFit, which I'm not a big fan of, and we're all suddenly Navy SEALs, which we're not. We're all Olympic hopefuls, which we're not. So those people don't typically live very long anyway. So, I mean, what are you trying to do here? Our goal at M360 Clinical Fitness is to establish your baseline RMR. That's first and foremost. Where do you build this house? What's the foundation in terms of energy creation and consumption? Fitness, ability to uptake, utilize oxygen. Remember, Dr. Veal told me a long time ago, we are aerobes, Tim, aerobes on the planet Earth, an oxygen-dependent planet. I love that. Thank you, Doc. We're going to acknowledge and improve your fat metabolism as measured by respiratory exchange rate to come out being closer to 0.7 than 1.0 during resting metabolic rate test or cardiometabolic crossover test. We want to dramatically improve our cardiometabolic crossover or the simple amount and quality of life that we can get between nothing and too much. Because I got people that don't have a cardiometabolic crossover. It's just all sugar, 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 sugar. Carbohydrate, carbohydrate, carbohydrate. They don't even have access, metabolic access to the utilization of stored body fat, which is to signal a whole lot of things are wrong within that metabolism. We want to get in there, identify, and affect those pieces. So what is cardiometabolic crossover, CMC? Here's a sample. Here's a vivid color picture. Let's look at the color legend up here. You got yellow's fat. You got purple's carbohydrate. You got green as your power output. You got pink, which is your heart rate in terms of beats per minute. This is a test. I know it well because it's mine. It's a 33-minute ramp test. This is a test we'd put you through to find your VO2 max, be one thing. Those things we listed. Your cardiometabolic crossover point. Mine happens to come about 87 and 90% of my max heart rate, which is right here. The yellow circle is. I'm pointing it out. And what is that? It's as we raise the power or the wattage that you're riding at, heart rate starts to go up, reacting to the wattage. Here I think I started at 50 watts, 75 watts, 100 watts, 125, 150, 200, 250, 275, 300, 350, ended up around 385. I couldn't go anymore. My heart rate maxed out at around 150, and you could see that my substrate, beautiful thing, come up just like it's supposed to. This is perfect. Carbohydrate came out to play initially, as it does. It's called a glycogen flash. It comes out and it's ready for fight or flight, man. Autonomic nervous system. All gears go. Let's go. And then it realized, oh, there's really nothing going on here. Let's go ahead and just relax a little bit. So fat comes out to cover the cost. Sugar goes away. Carbohydrate goes down. So you see the ratio here. I think it's about 80-20 through there. But then as the intensity comes up, we need that quick energy. So sugar starts to come up. Keep this in mind. Our body stores, I think I have about 18 pounds of fat in my body. We have 3,500 calories of fat per pound of fat. 3,500 calories of energy. kilocalories of energy per pound of fat. I'm 10% body fat at 182 pounds. I have 18.2 pounds of fat times 32. I think it's 68, 70,000 calories of energy that I have access to because I'm fat adapted. Whereas over in the sugar, I can only store about 1,600 calories, 1,600 to 2,000, 400 to 500 grams of carbohydrate stored as in terms of glucose, glycogen in my body. So I don't have enough glycogen to fund life, basically. Okay, so you're trying to conserve glycogen, glucose, carbohydrate, and utilize fat. So if you utilize fat like this, you also get 108 units of energy per molecule of this fat yellow stuff, and you only get 36 from carbohydrate. So no matter how you square this up and look at it chemically, or look at chemistry part of it, or metabolics of it, or physical activity of it, metabolic efficiency, whatever, efficacy, whatever you want to call it, crossover, the higher it is to the right, the more room you got here to live life. Because we don't live life up here, top right. We don't live life down here either. We shouldn't be. Sedentary, we live it in the middle. So let's get more metabolically efficient, and let's get better at life. Have a great day.